The day my husband fired me in front of the entire company started like every other lie in our marriage, beautiful on the surface. By 8 in the morning, the 22nd floor of Weston Global was already alive with movement. Assistants rushed through glass hallways carrying coffee and contracts. Executives stood near conference rooms pretending stress made them important. And somewhere in the center of all that power was my husband, Daniel Weston, the man every business magazine called a genius. To the world, he was brilliant. To me, he was becoming someone I no longer recognized. I stood quietly near the elevator doors holding a tablet against my chest, while employees avoided eye contact with me the way they had for weeks. People notice tension long before they understand it. They could feel something changing between Daniel and me, even if they didn't know the truth yet. The truth was simple. Daniel had stopped seeing me as his wife a long time ago. Now I was just another employee under his control. "Morning, Mrs. Weston," one assistant whispered nervously while walking past. "Mrs. Weston, that title used to mean something."
How?
It sounded like a warning. I walked toward my office slowly, ignoring the knot tightening in my stomach. Through the glass walls across the building, I could already see Daniel inside the main boardroom, preparing for the quarterly executive meeting. His posture was sharp, confident, untouchable. The same posture that once made me fall in love with him now made the entire company fear him. And lately, 3 months earlier, Daniel had started changing. Late meetings, secret calls, locked office doors. First I blamed pressure. Weston Global was expanding faster than expected, and Daniel carried the company like it was oxygen. But eventually I realized it wasn't stress changing him, it was arrogance. Power changes people slowly. That's what nobody tells you. It doesn't destroy them overnight. It convinces them they're untouchable first. By 9 o'clock, every executive had gathered inside the boardroom. I sat near the far end of the table while Daniel stood at the front beside a giant presentation screen glowing with company projections. He looked perfect. Tailored black suit, cold expression, wedding ring still on his finger, like irony itself. The meeting began normally enough until Daniel suddenly changed slides. My name appeared on the screen. The room went silent instantly. I frowned slightly, confused. Daniel folded his hands calmly. "Before we continue discussing next quarter projections," he said smoothly, "there's an internal issue we need to address." Something cold moved through my chest. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Daniel continued speaking without emotion. "Over the last 6 months, several financial inconsistencies have been linked directly to our senior operations department." I stared at him. Senior operations department. My department. A few executives exchanged nervous glances. At first I genuinely thought this had to be a misunderstanding. Then Daniel looked directly at me and smiled.
Not warmly?
Politically, the kind of smile powerful men use right before they destroy someone publicly. "I trusted the wrong person," he said. The room became painfully still. Heartbeats started pounding hard enough to make my ears ring. "Daniel," I said carefully, "what exactly are you implying?" But he ignored the question completely. Instead, he picked up a file from the table. And that was the moment I realized my husband wasn't just accusing me. He was preparing to ruin me. For a few seconds, nobody in the boardroom moved. The silence felt unreal, like the entire floor had stopped breathing at the same time. I looked around slowly, searching for confusion on someone else's face, some sign that this had to be a misunderstanding, but all I saw was fear. Not for me, for themselves. Because nobody challenges Daniel Weston publicly. Not inside Weston Global. Not anywhere. Daniel opened the file calmly, almost casually, while the executives around the table avoided looking directly at me. Years earlier, those same people used to invite me to dinners, praise my ideas, and tell everyone I was the reason the company culture still felt human. Now they looked at me like survival mattered more than loyalty. And maybe it did. Over the last 2 quarters, Daniel said smoothly, unauthorized financial movements have damaged multiple operational accounts. He slid several printed documents across the table, toward me. I looked down at them carefully. Numbers, transactions, authorization codes, and my signature. Except, my stomach dropped instantly. Those weren't my signatures. Someone had copied them. I looked back up slowly. These documents are fake. Daniel leaned against the edge of the table, completely calm. "Are they?" Confidence in his voice terrified me more than the accusation itself. because he already knew how this meeting would end. I stood up immediately. You cannot seriously believe I would steal from this company. One executive shifted awkwardly in his chair but stayed silent. Another looked down at his laptop. Cowards, every single one of them. Daniel sighed softly, like I was disappointing him publicly instead of exposing his lies. This isn't personal, Ava, he said. That almost made me laugh. Not personal? My own husband was accusing me of fraud in front of an entire executive board. It became personal the second you put my name on that screen, I replied coldly. For the first time, something sharp flashed behind Daniel's eyes, but it disappeared quickly. That was his real talent, control. No matter what happened, Daniel always looked composed enough to convince people he was the reasonable one in the room. He clasped his hands behind his back slowly. CEO, he continued, I have a responsibility to protect this company from internal corruption, regardless of who's involved. There it was. The performance. The noble leader protecting his empire. Except I knew Daniel better than anyone else in that room, and I could feel it. This wasn't damage control. It was a removal. He wanted me gone. The question was why. I looked directly at him. If you actually believed these accusations, you would have spoken to me privately first. A dangerous pause followed. Several people looked between us nervously now. They could finally feel it too, the tension beneath the business language. Daniel stepped closer to me slowly and lowered his voice just enough to sound controlled. You left me with no choice. That sentence hit differently. Because suddenly this meeting didn't feel corporate anymore. It felt personal. It's very personal. I narrowed my eyes. What does that mean? But he ignored the question again. Instead, he turned toward human resources, sitting near the far side of the table. Effective immediately, he announced, Ava Weston is terminated from Weston Global pending full financial investigation. The words slammed into me so hard, my body went numb for a second. Terminated. Just like that. After 11 years helping build this company beside him, after every late night, every sacrifice, every deal I helped save behind the scenes while Daniel collected magazine covers and applause. And the worst part? He looked relieved. Like he had finally removed the last obstacle standing in his way. Security entered the boardroom moments later. Not rushing, not aggressive. Just prepared. Prepared because this had all been planned long before I walked into that meeting. I looked at Daniel one last time, waiting for guilt, for hesitation, for anything human. But instead he said something that changed everything. He should have taken the settlement when I offered it. Settlement. My heart stopped, because suddenly I realized this wasn't only about the company. My husband had been planning to erase me from his life completely. The word settlement echoed in my head long after the room went silent again. Suddenly every strange conversation from the past few weeks came rushing back at once. How Daniel. Casually bringing up divorce during dinner. How the cold emails from his lawyers asking me to review preliminary arrangements. The way he kept insisting we could separate peacefully. This meeting had never been about fraud. It was about control. Daniel wanted everything. Company, the reputation, the future. And he thought humiliating me publicly would force me into disappearing quietly. I stared at him while security waited beside the door like obedient statues. You planned this, I said slowly. Daniel didn't answer immediately, but he didn't need to. His silence confessed enough. The executives around the table looked deeply uncomfortable now. They were finally realizing they were trapped inside something uglier than a normal corporate firing. This was personal destruction disguised as professionalism. One board member cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps this discussion should continue privately. No, Daniel interrupted sharply. That single word cut through the room instantly. His mask slipped for just a second. And everyone saw it, the arrogance, the need for dominance. He looked back at me calmly again. You forced this situation, Ava. I almost laughed at how insane that sounded. You forged documents and framed your own wife, I said quietly, and somehow I forced this. His expression hardened slightly, careful. There it was again, not regret, threat. For years, Daniel had controlled every conversation exactly the same way. Calm tone, careful wording, quiet intimidation hidden beneath sophistication. Most people never noticed it. I did, because I lived with it. I picked up the fake financial documents from the table and looked through them again carefully. Whoever created them had done professional work. Dates aligned perfectly. Approval chains looked authentic. Even the signatures were nearly flawless. Nearly. Then I saw it. One tiny detail. My eyes stopped moving instantly. Transaction authorization code near the bottom of the page. Wrong format. Very wrong. My heartbeat slowed suddenly. It's because only one group of people inside Weston Global would know that old authorization format had been retired 8 months earlier. Executive ownership. I looked up slowly at Daniel. And for the first time since the meeting started, I smiled. A small smile, but enough to make him notice. His eyes narrowed immediately. "What's funny?" he asked coldly. I placed the papers back onto the table carefully. "You made one mistake," I said. The room became silent again. Daniel crossed his arms. "I don't make mistakes. It's exactly why this one matters." I could feel everyone watching us now, waiting, confused. Daniel stepped closer. "Explain yourself." But instead of answering him directly, I turned toward the board members sitting around the room. Men and women who thought they understood how Weston Global actually worked. None of them knew the full truth, not even Daniel. "You all think Daniel owns this company?" I said calmly. Several confused looks spread around the room instantly. Daniel's expression darkened. "Ava," but this time I interrupted him. "No," I said firmly. "You've talked enough." Something shifted in the atmosphere immediately. For the first time all morning, Daniel looked uncertain. Only slightly, but enough for me to see it. Reached into my bag slowly while every eye followed the movement. Then I pulled out a thin black folder. The same folder Daniel once told me never to bring into board discussions. The folder containing the original ownership agreements created before Weston Global became a billion-dollar corporation. I placed it carefully onto the conference table. Daniel's face changed instantly. And suddenly, he wasn't the calmest person in the room anymore. One executive frowned. "What is this?" I looked directly at my husband, the man who thought he had already destroyed me. Then I opened the folder, and everything changed. The moment the folder opened, the entire room leaned forward slightly. Not because they understood what they were looking at yet, but because Daniel's face had lost color, and that alone terrified them. For years, people inside Weston Global treated Daniel like he was untouchable, controlled every room he entered. Every conversation bent around him naturally. Investors trusted him. Employees feared him. Even board members followed his lead carefully. But now he looked nervous. Powerful men only look nervous when they know something dangerous is about to surface. I removed several documents carefully and spread them across the conference table. Old partnership agreements, original company filings, ownership structures, signed records dated years before Weston Global became publicly recognized. One board member adjusted his glasses immediately. "What exactly are we looking at?" I answered without taking my eyes off Daniel. "The truth." Daniel stepped forward fast. "This meeting is over." But nobody moved. That was new. For the first time in years, people ignored him. I could feel it happening slowly, the shift in power. Tiny, fragile, but real. I slid one final document toward the center of the table, the original founding equity agreement. The room became completely silent, because printed clearly across the bottom of the page was something nobody expected to see. My name, not as an employee, not as a spouse, as a majority owner. Several executives looked confused instantly. One woman whispered, "This can't be right," but it was. Every signature was authenticated, every filing legal, every percentage binding. Years ago, when Daniel was still struggling to launch Weston Global, my father secretly financed the company through private ownership structures. Daniel brought the vision, I brought the capital. But for branding reasons and Daniel's ego, we agreed his face would represent the company publicly. Quietly, legally, invisibly, I remained the majority shareholder. Daniel always hated that arrangement. At first, he pretended it didn't bother him. Success changes insecurity into resentment. And over the years, resentment turned into ambition, then greed. Now I finally understood why he wanted me gone. Not just from the marriage. From the company. Completely. One board member grabbed the documents quickly, rereading the percentages twice. "Daniel," he said slowly, "is this true?"
Ow.
Daniel's jaw tightened hard. "This agreement is outdated," he snapped immediately. I almost smiled. Desperation was finally entering his voice. No, I replied calmly. It was updated 3 months ago after the last expansion merger that hit him hard, because he knew exactly what that meant. The ownership rights were still fully active, legally protected, and irreversible without my approval. The room erupted into nervous conversation instantly. People whispered. Phones appeared under tables. Executives who ignored me for months suddenly looked at me very differently now, not with pity, with caution. Daniel slammed his hand against the table suddenly. Enough, he barked. The room froze again, looked directly at me, and for the first time all day, the mask disappeared completely. Like pure anger. You think this changes anything? He said quietly. I held his stare without fear now. Yes, I answered. Because finally I understood something important. Daniel never believed I would fight back. He thought humiliation would make me weak. He thought love would make me obedient. But the biggest mistake powerful people make is assuming kindness means helplessness. I stood slowly from my chair, then I looked around the boardroom one final time. At this moment, I said clearly, the acting CEO of Weston Global is under investigation for fraud, falsified financial evidence, and unlawful executive misconduct. Nobody interrupted me, because now they knew who actually had power. Daniel stared at me like he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him, but I wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Because what happened next would destroy far more than his reputation. The energy inside the boardroom had completely changed. An hour earlier, everyone had watched me like I was already finished. Now, those same executives looked terrified to even speak without choosing the right side first, and Daniel felt it too. You could see it in the tension spreading across his face. The control he spent years building was slipping right in front of him, and for a man like Daniel Weston, losing control was worse than losing money. This is ridiculous, he said sharply. You're turning a personal marital dispute into corporate sabotage. I almost admired how quickly he adapted. Even cornered, Daniel still knew how to perform. But performances only work until facts enter the room. I looked toward the head legal advisor sitting silently near the far side of the table. Would you like to explain whether these ownership documents are legitimate? The older man adjusted his tie nervously before answering, as he admitted carefully. They appear fully enforceable. That sentence landed like an explosion. Several executives immediately started talking over each other. Why were we never informed? Does this affect voting authority? Who actually controls executive removal? Panic spread fast. Because suddenly the company they thought they understood looked completely different. Daniel raised his voice immediately. Everyone calmed down. But nobody truly listened this time, and he noticed. That terrified him more than the documents. I watched him carefully while the room spiraled into confusion. For years, Daniel built Weston Global around one idea that he was irreplaceable. Every interview, every public appearance, every leadership speech reinforced the same image. Daniel Weston was Weston Global, but now people were realizing the company existed long before his ego took over it. I stepped forward calmly. The forged financial investigation against me ends today. Daniel laughed once under his breath. You still can't prove I created those documents. I don't need to. That caught his attention immediately. I reached into the folder again and removed a smaller file. One I had almost never used. Internal executive surveillance reports. Daniel's expression changed the second he recognized them. That's when I knew he forgot they existed. You installed private monitoring software in executive offices 2 years ago, I said. You claimed it was for security. Several board members looked shocked instantly. Daniel stepped toward me fast. Don't, that one word confirmed everything. I opened the file anyway. The software archived all executive file modifications automatically. I continued calmly, including document creation timestamps. The legal advisor stood up immediately now, realizing where this was going. I handed him the report. He scanned the first page, then the second. Then his face went pale. These financial records, he whispered slowly. They were created from the CEO's private authorization terminal. Complete silence. No movement. No breathing. Nothing. Daniel didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say. The room finally saw him the way I had started seeing him months ago. Not brilliant, not visionary, not untouchable, just dangerous. One board member leaned back heavily in his chair. My God. Another executive looked directly at Daniel with open disbelief. You framed your own wife. But Daniel wasn't looking at them anymore. He was staring at me. And beneath the anger in his eyes now was something else. Fear, real fear. Not because he was losing the company, because he realized I had stopped protecting him. For years I covered his arrogance with loyalty. I softened his image. I cleaned up his mistakes quietly behind closed doors. But not anymore. I looked directly at the board. As majority owner, I said firmly, I'm calling for an immediate emergency vote regarding Daniel Weston's removal as CEO. And the terrifying part? Nobody objected. For the first time in his life, Daniel Weston had nothing to say. He looked around the room like he was waiting for anyone to stand with him. The same executives who used to laugh at his jokes, follow his decisions, and defend his every move were now avoiding his eyes completely. Power doesn't disappear loudly. It leaves in silence first. Then comes the fall. The legal advisor cleared his throat carefully. According to majority ownership structure, the vote can proceed immediately. That sentence sealed everything. Daniel turned back to me slowly. And in that moment, the arrogance that had defined him for years cracked completely. This is still my company, he said quietly. But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. I shook my head once. I replied, it never was. That truth hit harder than anything else in the room. Because for Daniel, Weston Global wasn't just a company. It was identity, control, ego. Everything he believed made him untouchable. And now, it was slipping away in real time. The board vote was called immediately. One by one, hands were raised, not out of loyalty to me, but out of fear of staying loyal to him. Because by now, everyone understood the same thing. Daniel Weston was not being removed because of one mistake. He was being removed because the illusion had finally collapsed. When the final vote was counted, the legal advisor spoke quietly. The motion passes. Silence. Final. Unchangeable. Daniel stood there for a moment, completely still. Like his mind hadn't fully accepted what just happened. Then slowly he let out a breath. A tired, broken sound. And for the first time since I had known him, he looked human, not powerful, not dangerous. Just a man who lost control of everything he built. Security entered the room again, but this time nobody stopped them. They didn't grab him. They didn't rush him. They simply waited. Because even they could feel it. This wasn't just a corporate removal. This was the end of an era. Daniel looked at me one last time, and I expected anger, or revenge, or denial. But instead, his voice came out low. You planned this, he said. I held his gaze calmly. No, I replied. You did. That was the difference. I didn't destroy him. I simply stopped protecting him from what he had become. He nodded slowly, like he finally understood something he had ignored for years. Then he looked away and walked out. No speech. No final warning. No dramatic exit. Just footsteps fading down the glass hallway he once owned. After he left, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Nobody celebrated. Nobody spoke too loudly. Because everyone understood something important. Power had just changed hands in a way none of them expected. One of the board members finally broke the silence. What happens now? All eyes turned to me. I looked around the table, the same people who once overlooked me completely and spoke with calm certainty. Now, I said, we rebuild this company properly. Not through fear, not through ego, but through truth. Months later, Weston Global didn't just recover. It changed. Stronger leadership, cleaner systems, real accountability. Daniel. He disappeared from public headlines almost completely. But sometimes, success isn't about destroying someone who wronged you. It's about taking back everything they thought you didn't have the power to own, and realizing you always did.